Hey everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. Welcome back to this YouTube channel on narcissism, narcissistic healing, and narcissistic relationships. Today we're going to take on something, I'm not even trying to bring this one up. It's sort of like the difference between endurance and tragedy and what people go through in narcissistic relationships. So let's just sort of unpack that, shall we? So let's say a person comes up to you, or a person you know, this happens to them. You find out, or they say to you, my parent died, my mother, my father, maybe a grandparent, or even a spouse. Our first reaction is, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? All my sympathies. What can I do to help? This would be the case even if it was a toxic person who passed from their lives. We do something similar when there's any other kind of major tragedy. Fire burns down a house, or a car accident, or a hurricane blows off a roof. Those are, no doubt, tragedies. They're incredibly unsettling and awful for the people who experience them. And people in those situations will, rightfully so, and for a short time at least, get condolences, visitors, phone calls, solicitousness, and support. This may even happen during a divorce. Some people may check in with the person going through a divorce, help them maybe with a move. Not always, but definitely some of the time. But in the realm of narcissistic abuse, you also have what I call the lifers. The folks who, for any number of reasons, can't get out of their narcissistic relationships. Money, culture, religion, fear. Reasons that are very real to them and may relate perhaps even to very real cultural prohibitions and the like. These people are walking through an emotional desert without water every day. It's a life of relative desolation. Certainly there are moments in there. The less severe the narcissistic person, the more likely that there may be some decent days in there. In the case of more severe narcissistic individuals, the bad days are really bad, and there are a lot more of them. These folks may recognize that they could try and escape, but it may mean losing safety or support or everyone they know. That's a lot to ask someone to do. But for the lifers, especially when they are surrounded by enablers, it's not for me to sit here and say whether it's worse than a death or a hurricane, but it's a real philosophical question, isn't it? Comparing grappling with the acute crisis of a tragedy versus the protracted agony of enduring a narcissistically abusive relationship. People who are walking through the toxic day-to-day, these are people whose sense of self is forever sacrificed, who live in chronic gaslighting. I don't care how much damn social support you have, and typically the lifers don't have enough. Living under long-term conditions of narcissistic abuse is incredibly destructive. The fact is, the lifers don't get casseroles, phone calls, social media posts asking for folks to support them or telling them that they are so brave. They don't get visitors or condolences. Many of the lifers try to put on a brave face and perhaps for reasons of shame, never say anything about how bad it is. They elevate realistic expectations to an unheard level and recognize that theirs will kind of be half a life. That on this passage of life, they didn't get to have an easy ride. The lifers, to me, may be the hardest part of doing this work as a therapist. Many times they are in regions of the world where narcissism is endemic, but there's little power, for example, for women or for those of less economic means. So there is no leaving. There is merely enduring. These are folks where they know if they step out of line, set a boundary, or try to get out, the consequences may be lethal, physically harmful, or result in even more isolation. I have clinically worked with lifers. Their lives are at best carousels. There are certainly some good days here and there, but mostly it is heavy-hearted endurance, and they find themselves peering into the lives of others and seeing the difference between their lives and other people's lives. And then there's shame, there's pain, and there's powerlessness. I guess this video is for the lifers, for the pain that comes with endurance. Nobody does a fundraiser for somebody whose life is just awful day over day due to narcissistic abuse. Only when the big tragedies happen do we see that kind of support and outpouring. And this means that the people who are plodding day after day through the never-changing toxic landscape of a toxic relationship often don't get the support they need, or, unfortunately, they minimize their own pain and grief, saying things like, well, those people went through something worse than me. They went through a real tragedy. It's not a competition. These are different kinds of pain. The pain of the sudden disaster or tragedy versus the pain of the ongoing, emotionally impoverished space of a long-term narcissistic relationship. I would argue these pains are pretty damn comparable in terms of the harm they do to the people going through them, with the difference being that the lifers, the folks who are enduring rather than responding to a sudden crisis, will never get the support they need. At a minimum, sometimes the tragedies enable people to get out of bad situations. The sameness, the endurance, there is little way to harness that to change a person's circumstances. The tendency of survivors to already say, well, I'm not getting hit, or at least I have a place to live. I mean, I guess that's circumspect, but that minimization means that you are invalidating yourself as well. To be manipulated and gaslighted and walk on eggshells day after day, over time, that is traumatic, and it accumulates. If you do know someone and you happen to be aware that they're in one of these more bleak situations, be that support for them. Their life is like a mini disaster every day, and whether it is a casserole or a coffee date, a phone call, or just checking in, those small gestures go a long way for folks enduring long-term, inescapable narcissistic abuse. And for the lifers out there, just a reminder, this is real, and you do need support. And it can be sometimes painful, and you'll feel guilty thinking it's painful, watching people rallying around those going through more visible losses, and your silent and invisible scars often go unseen. I've often said that if the survivors of narcissistic abuse wore their scars on the outside rather than inside on their psyche, people would be calling 911 as soon as they saw them. Narcissistic abuse is a silent and invisible scourge that leaves long-term survivors confused, invalidated, ashamed, and minimizing their own pain. Your pain is real, even if it is not always recognized. Thanks again.